Well, welcome, Robert. Thank you so much for being here in the education revolution with us.
It's such a pleasure to join you today, Michelle. Thank you.
You have been part of the revolution for a long time, Robert. I don't mean to date you, but we did just have a conversation before we came on air where we're talking decades, not years, we're talking decades. So I'm very much looking forward to mining your experience and expertise and sharing those incredible insights that you've been able to garner over the years with the audience today.
Thank you for that. And we've been talking about Beyond Pockets of Innovations for decades, and we're on that mission of digital transformation. And passion has no clock is one of my taglines on our website.
I love it. I love it. I like to start by going back, Robert, and asking folks about your first experiences with systems of education. You know, it's a pretty amazing sector to be in because, as a professional, because it touches everybody. Hopefully, you know, folks, I mean, it has, even if you haven't attended formal education, say, even in the elementary levels, there are people around the world who learn from their grandmothers, learn from, you know, in the home, learn on sports teams. So education is one of those things that permeates every human being's life in some way, shape, or form. If I hone you in on formal education and the structures of like elementary school, high school, what were some of your first memories of systems of education? Did they work for you? Did they not work for you?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I come from an immigrant Italian family where my mother, because of the war, didn't have an opportunity to go to school because the family were farmers and she was preparing food for the family. And my father had a grade 2 education. So it was very different growing up than what my kids experienced, who, you know, are CPAs and investment bankers. And, you know, we didn't have that exposure to post-secondary formal education. It was very limited. But yeah, no, my family was very passionate about education because they didn't get the opportunity. So I have great memories growing up, and I remember our elementary school being built as a kid before I actually attended the school. And my father helped build the subway system in Toronto. So construction was in my blood. We recently renovated our house, and I did a lot of the work myself because I'm able to do that.
So that's an education too. You know, you learned from your father those skills and trade skills, and
exactly.
then you're also one of the first in your generation to go to formal education as consistently as you were able to go.
Yeah,
to.
absolutely. And you know, Mr. Everett in high school talked about your 20s years of your should haves and could haves. And I thought, you know, if I don't become a hockey player, I was a pretty gifted hockey player, I'll become a policeman or a mechanic. That was my dream, right? And but then he got me thinking, I don't want to have any regrets. So I decided to go to grade 13 and go to York University. And that's where that was one of my TSN turning points in my career, which was very cool. But the other one I have to share was because it's rooted at York. You know, I never imagined I'd be working there one day in my role as sport information director and then running the business alliance. But Kevin O'Leary's good friend was chair of our board of the business alliance in the mid 90s. And we were just getting on the internet and he said, you know, Kevin's launching this education software company in Canada. I said, wow, that sounds fascinating. I'm fascinated by the internet. Technology is the future, I said. And I am passionate about education. Let him know I'm interested. That's how I left and went into EdTech.
Oh,
That's
wow.
and so that your connection is very real and still strong today. But that was another TSN turning point. It's sharing your passion and letting other people know it leads to opportunity. So
and making that decision to opt into further education. Let's go back still for a second.
Lifelong learning is
yeah,
part of my
where you
DNA.
made that decision. So there's something here that's kind of innate to you. This idea
Yes.
of learning and loving learning and learning in different contexts and wanting to extend that learning, even though you didn't have necessarily models of people who had done that before you. You were passionate about that and you coming across new ideas and wanting to learn there. Can I ask what the narrative was about what school meant when you were going into elementary and secondary school, though, Robert? You don't need to say the dates or the decade, but let's say when you went to school, early years, what was school for? Like, was it Was it the story? Were you the one that did you experience that you go to school because you're learning to work in the economy, and that's what school's about, and you know?
School was like a necessary evil. I didn't actually love school. There were some elements I really enjoyed, but Mrs. Fogarty in my yearbook wrote, my grade 12 English teacher, the only sign of life is growth, and drew a little flower. I read that over and over, and I'm like, what is she trying to tell me? Is she worried about me? What is she trying to tell me? That instilled the growth mindset, quite simply. So the power of words that teachers have really do make an impact
Mm.
on students, and they underestimate that. Right, when I'm at a conference and I'm having a conversation with a teacher and they think I'm trying to sell them something, they often, this comment I heard many times, I'm just a teacher. And I
Mm.
stop them in their tracks and I say, listen, as a parent, there was nothing more important than my kids' education. Nothing. Because if my kids failed, then I failed. It's not about me succeeding in life. It's the next generation. It's helping my kids thrive, and parental engagement was so important to us. And I sacrificed a lot for that.
And so the teacher, you see the teacher as the focal point of education. When you were going through
100%.
it, it was about the teachers you had, and then
I had some great teachers. Everyone remembers at least one
yeah,
awesome teacher. And what were those qualities, right? They
yeah,
challenged you. They did some fun things. You did project-based learning.
yeah.
Dr. Greg Malzecki, who was
Mhm.
on my advisory board, award-winning professor from York University. Sadly, he passed during COVID.
Mhm.
And Greg was my mentor, taught in the sport admin program that I graduated from. And he was the most loved professor on campus because he cared about his kids and he challenged you. And he was an awesome storyteller. Project-based learning was his thing. We did a lot of projects, a lot of cool projects. Go interview a past professional athlete and hear their story. I interviewed Johnny Bowers sitting in the stands at Maple Leaf Gardens because my friend's dad was the GM. I was able to arrange that. I still have that tape. How amazing! I was like a reporter. I had to create list of questions. I had to rehearse. I had my cassette recorder back in the
Of
day.
course, the early technologies, and you mentioned
Yeah,
the internet as
I was.
well. Like that,
Yeah,
these are some of those early, the technology that you were being exposed to, that you were, when you say when you got back um, into York in the higher education model, and Kevin
yeah,
O'Leary, this connection around the internet coming out in the 90s. How did let's before we get to that stage where we're talking about internet and ICT as people might still recognize it today,
sure.
it's still very different. Dial-up was it's not around
It
anymore.
was dialed up.
But what was the influence of technology, the earlier technologies coming out, like those cassette recorders, the portable, like the Walkmans, and like
Yeah,
these
the
were things
Walkman.
that because I know that your work looks at, similar to my own, this idea of living in a post-digital reality where technology now is ubiquitous and is part of our cultural systems like healthcare, education, mating. Unfortunately, dating is no longer something that doesn't exist outside of technological enhancements. So you look at technology like I do as something that's cultural. But this was slow and steady in the 80s and the 90s. This was coming in bits and pieces of technology as things, not as cultural
Right.
shifts, but these things were entering into the world. How did you experience the introduction of some of these newer technologies shifting the way you were living, interacting with people? Obviously, we're talking about in education as well, like how
Right.
being able to record.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there were some real game-changing technologies that came along the way, right? So when I was in high school, the Texas Instruments calculator
Yeah.
made its way into my hand, and it was the coolest thing. And you know what? It was banned. They
Yeah.
banned it, just like ChatGPT. It's
Yeah.
no different than when they were banning the internet, the Google, for certain things, and history repeats itself, right?
Mm.
But it's putting the technology in the hands of the end user that's most impactful. you know, and if I look at today, you know, what are some of the immediate impactful game-changing technologies, the ones that are democratizing, you know, the lives of people, like a Canva out of Australia that's valued at multi-billion dollars. I first saw it at South by Southwest EDU when Guy Kawasaki demoed it. And Guy was a former chief evangelist of Apple. He was a chief evangelist for Canva. We use that every single day. Why? Because it's super easy. All the teachers are using it, kids are using it. So that's a real simple message, you know, that, you know, if you're developing a new technology, maybe, sorry, I might be getting ahead of myself here, but make it, you know, put it in the hands of the end users. The more people you impact in a positive way, the more you will be rewarded.
And that kind of is what I remember about technologies coming out when I was younger as well in the 90s. You know, the pager, they were status symbols. If you had a yellow sports Walkman, you were the cool kid. And if you didn't, and you'd go home and you'd beg your parents, can I get that new piece of technology? And that still exists. There are these prohibitive entry points for a lot of technology. And when I look at something like OpenAI as a platform or other things like Canva, I think along those same lines: access, democratization of information. The Wikipedia, when Wikipedia came out, you know how hard, I remember those encyclopedia salespeople coming to the house, knocking on
We
the
had
door,
that
right? How
set
much
of
money?
Britannica encyclopedias.
Yes. And how much money
They
those
cost
were
$700.
expensive. Yeah.
They
Whereas now,
$700.
look at this. Now you can have the encyclopedia crowdsourced and checked for reliability in the palm of your hand, as it were. So I know we get so excited, and I do want to talk about the technology. When you were I want to pull on some other threads about the education. We talked about a growth mindset. I'm making notes for later. Project-based learning.
Yeah.
And then you're also talking about experiential education, Robert, right? This idea of going out and doing
Yes.
things. So you resonated early and throughout your educational life as a young person with experiential education, because that's, you see how all these things are still all the rage. Like, we knew that these growth mindset, this idea of compassionate teaching and learning, compassionate communication, project-based learning, experiential education, authentic assessment structures, like, they felt good to you decades ago. And now we're still talking about them. So before we get into the tech side of things, I want to ask you why you think some of these teaching and learning, ways of teaching and learning, why are there still so many lectures, Robert? Why are there still so many people, do you think? Because I want to move us to digital transformation, right? But digital transformation, various components. It has the teaching and learning side of things and the technology side of things. They're ubiquitously entangled. Okay, but let's just talk about the teaching and learning side of things, because I really get frustrated when I see technology support archaic, traditional teaching and learning. Like, I don't want to live stream a lecture, Robert. Why are we live streaming lectures?
Or you
Why
can do the flipped classroom and let the students present their work, right? That's what it
why do you think it's so sticky? Why do you think these ways of teaching, these more transmissive, older ways of teaching, are so sticky?
I think, you know, we're going back to the industrial model that, you know, we still are stuck. You know, if you look at this workspace, it resembles no classroom. This is unlike any class. There's my co-work, and there's my podcast. We got hydroponics, a garden here. Like, this doesn't resemble a class. This is the classroom of the future. We had a design thinking class here, a business group of business students from the Peel District School Board working on a canvas that we created, and they absolutely loved it. They were creating a board game. Right? They were creating their own board game aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, which inspired me to create a board game on the SDGs, because no one's done it yet. Wow. They were creating their own. I said, okay, infuse at least one SDG. I'm thinking, I'm going to create a board game with all of them, 17. How cool would that be if you integrate QR codes along the way with it? So that's one of our projects. That's how we innovate. Right? By collaborating. But yeah, so we're still stuck in that industrial model. And, you know, from ERDI in our conversations, laser focused, deep learning conversations with the superintendents, budget is an issue. is a huge issue. They still have desks that are 40, 50 years old in the schools that are straight row desks because that's the model. So partnerships, unless we start forging strategic partnerships, and I asked that very specific question, and it's not easy when you're dealing with the purchasing department, but my partnerships, this is the steel case classroom. They don't, all my LCD, I got 4 LCD interactive panels, were all donated through partnerships. It's not rocket science, but if we don't embark on more innovative practices and break away from that cycle, because everything's cookie cutter. My wife was in city planning, worked with the school boards to build new schools, and they would take one design from a previous school and replicate it because that was the most cost effective thing to do. And so you're not moving forward. Now, I will say this, there are pockets of innovation. And but we aren't getting beyond it. That's the inspiration for this contest. Schools of the Future, Student Invention Challenge, reimagine the school of the future.
And this is where, when we do this work and we have these ideas, I feel like there's so many people with so many good ideas that it's not, like you say, rocket science in terms of providing more spaces for collaboration, having like multi-dimensional spaces where people can work in quiet spaces, people can work in small groups, and people have large spaces for large group interactions. Like, this is not revolutionary thinking. Interactive screens, like, these are, so the barriers to that, money being a big barrier to that, partnerships, as you say, being a potential way of looking at improving that. How do you feel the mindset piece plays in here? Because I feel that even though we were both at conferences recently, ERDI, just elaborate on that acronym for people.
Education Research and Development Institute, which is a collaboration of industry and education leaders, superintendents and directors from across the country. So, and I'm an advisor in the US. And I also do the US when I'm an advisor to that.
And I was just at the COSIN, so the Consortium of Networking in America, which is full of the same folks, right? Same folks, admin, superintendent, district CTOs, chief technology officers. And everybody's talking about money. But there was recently, because of the COVID pandemic and this emergency response, governments have been pumping millions of dollars into education.
Billions.
Right?
Billions.
I didn't want to get too hyperbolic.
Yeah.
Yes. Billions of dollars in education. So let's say money is coming down the pipeline, Robert. Why do you think it's not getting spent in the ways like we're talking about it, this infrastructural classroom reimagining, or, ubiquitous devices with accessible software? Like, why are the changes that we're envisioning in terms of creating these spaces not happening, you think, if the money was there?
So I'm going to challenge you, because faculties of education need to transform. Through our, you need alignment. It's an ecosystem. And so if you continue to, more often than not, I hear that the students that are coming out of these faculties of ed, they might be tech savvy when it comes to Instagram and whatever, right? But not pedagogically savvy. So there's a distinct difference in the way you use technology with students. So, and then these leaders are making their way into these positions, and they don't have the expertise and the knowledge to run a big corporation. Very few. Susan LaRosa, that ran the York Region School Board, she said, when I became director, I went and got my MBA. I didn't think I had the tools to run it. She went and got her MBA while she was director. So there are some savvy leaders, and there are the ones that grow into the role. But you're running a business, whether you like it or not. You're running a business.
Well, there's 3 components I find, right? Like, if you're operating in the administrative level of education as a system, and you are responsible for the shifting, the investment at that system, at the systemic level, there are 3 components. One is that you are running a business, a school, a district. It's got clients. It has branding. We all know it's got things that you need to consider. and managing the budgets at that scale. So you're running a business, so you require those skill sets. Two, you're in now a post-digital environment and a culture. So there are technical skills in terms of being able to understand better what exactly is required, or what is the value of the room setup that you have there behind you and a touchable LCD screen. So there's business skills, technical skills, and the teaching and learning skills. Like, you need to know what evidence-based pedagogy, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, competency-based evaluation, like. And so people at that decision-making level, both of us being coming out of recent conferences, talking to these people, do you see the biggest skills gap being with the business know-how? Is that where you're out of those three buckets, business, technical, and educational, is it the business skills that are lacking the most?
It's about alignment, right? And it takes a digital village to raise a child in the 21st century, I like to say. Parents are accustomed to seeing their kids schooled the way they were, right? Generally speaking. So where is the pressure? Where are the forces coming from to transform, right? If the forces aren't at the grassroots in the parents, if it's coming from the leaders, well, they're influencers, but the driving force is the voice of the people. And if I think parents are starting to, I'm optimistic that we're starting to see a sea change slowly. The pandemic was a huge accelerator, but Dr. Steve Jordan's psychologist, who happens to have his own EdTech company, talked about the threat of the great snapback. It snapped back way further than he thought. Teacher unions were advising teachers not to use technology and get back to basics. Our Minister of Education in Ontario is saying back to basics learning. Are you kidding me? Take his computer away, take his smartphone away, and let's see how back to basics he can operate.
That's just part one of this exciting conversation, my friends. Click on part two and continue with us on this important journey we like to call the education revolution.